Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the UpSet podcast. I am one of your hosts, Latasha Hewitt, but you know I have the crew with me. Well, at least a few of us.
Few of us.
Hey, guys.
Hey.
How you doing?
Great. We are a little light right now, but such is life. We're
Allie
still.
is not going to like that you said that. I'm just going to let you know that he's not going to like
Very
that.
little- Oh,
He's not
I
going to like.
I just caught that.
You go
Okay.
that, yeah,
Yeah, that would have been something that he would have said for sure.
sure.
Mhm.
Nah, that's my friend. I could say it.
Yes, absolutely. So, what's been going on, guys? Of course, we know a lot has been going on in our worlds. It's almost heart wrenching to even.
Listen,
Right.
I'm going to jump in right away. That what's heartbreaking to me, coming out of like 2 years of Black Pride, coming out of February, Black Lives Matter, all that good old fashioned lemonade. Just to think that even in wartime. I mean, even in wartime, there's still discrimination as far as becoming a refugee and getting out. That they're turning back black people, black students, Africans from
in the Ukraine.
in the Ukraine,
Yeah.
right, to go over to Poland and the different areas.
Right.
It's crazy.
Yeah.
to see
It's
them-
also heartbreaking that so many. I think the last count, I don't know if it's official. We're talking well over 2,000 civilians that have already died.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's just so hard,
and the number
hard
of
to
people.
deal with.
Yeah, the number of people who fled. I mean, the numbers are just like,
Isn't that 1 million now?
yeah, I
Yeah,
know.
it's about that.
Projected it to
Mhm.
be almost two at some point. I was like, wow, can
Mhm.
you imagine that? I just can't imagine that. And I refuse to look at some of the images. I'll see the headlines, the images say it all. I'm like, I just can't watch. It's
Mhm.
hard to believe that this is the society in which we live and that people are actually experiencing this in real time. This is not a history book.
Right.
This is not a movie. This is what people are dealing with right now. It's really
Gang, just think about this: that when we watch things like Saving Private Ryan, and when we watch all those things, people say that there's trauma that follows that even after watching those types of war movies. And just to think, we're actually seeing it happen. Think about those people like Tally who like comes in afterwards. And I was finishing when you jumped on it about trauma, and I think the war that even for us to watch it on CNN and all these different places, they're starting to even watch the bodies that's to show the
Right.
bodies that's there. So I think there's a huge trauma that's going to follow this, PTSD that's going to follow this, even for those of us who are watching, because we only read about this.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Now we're actually seeing it happen.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, on an up note, I
Yeah,
was
hurry up, please.
glad to hear that President Biden recommended Judge Brown Jackson
Yes.
Right.
nominated for the Supreme Court.
That's right.
I'm hoping that'll go through. She's eminently qualified. I've never heard of her until all of this, this story hit, but she appears to be, prepared and excited about doing it. Let's hope it gets through the Senate and
I'm sure it will.
Yeah, I'm really happy for her. And, of course, with it being Women's History Month,
Mhm.
we're always looking for ways to celebrate. And that would be a great one for
Right.
women and Black women specifically.
Awesome.
Well, also on a high note, before we get into our show, I was very happy to celebrate a birthday this week. I feel like
Yeah.
the older I
Right.
get,
How
the
old are
better
you
it becomes. So, I actually look forward to birthdays. I
Yep.
think after I hit 40 was kind of like, ooh, a somber point. But then after that, it's like, hey, another birthday.
So 50 is no big deal for you.
We'll see what happens when it comes.
Oh.
What happens when it comes. For now,
Kind of skipped over the question,
Yeah. Right.
So how old are you?
She didn't say anything when you asked how old she was. She was like, "Oh yeah."
Oh, you did?
well,
Oh, I'm 43. I'm proud to be 43.
Hell, you ought to
Oh,
be.
it's great.
Yeah.
There's an alternative to that.
I got socks older than you. 43.
Oh, I know. Well, guys, we're a little. I'm gonna say it again, since Tyler's here. We're a little light today, with the crew, but we are definitely excited about this evening's show because we're called the UpSet, And one of the things we try to do every week is invite our audience to share with us what's upsetting you. What topics do you want us to bring to the table and discuss? And we have several of you who write us with different topics. And recently, we actually received a letter from one of our viewers who is experiencing something unsettling for her. And it was definitely something that we said we want to bring to the UpSet. One is support to this young lady, but also to bring awareness to things that maybe some of us don't even realize are happening around us, or that we may even partake in, not realizing how it's impacting someone else. And so, this is technically our first show with our Dear UpSet letter. And I'm going to read to you all what we received, and then we're going to invite our guest on. We have a special guest today that we're really excited about, who's going to help us tackle this topic, because it is of a sensitive nature. So here's the letter. Dear UpSet, I have been struggling with this issue for years. I have prayed about it, but my soul is still disturbed. As a member of the Seventh-day Adventist Church, I feel that women of my church tend to have a problem with my body. And she goes on to give some examples. I've had married women pinch my butt to see if it's real or if I'm wearing a padded butt. I've been slapped on the butt while doing foot washing. Last summer, a good friend of mine slapped me on the butt and I slapped her back. The next thing I know, she reaches for my private area. I called to talk to the person about it, and all she could do was laugh. And the more she laughed, the more my womanhood was reduced. So I asked, how do you define sexual harassment? Let us say that our friendship is now on life support. My trust is gone with that person. I just feel violated. And she goes on to say, as I was ready to walk out of the church, I was thinking, as she was getting ready to walk out of the church, I was thinking, why am I tolerating this behavior? Every Sabbath, I am stressed out and have anxiety about going to church and what I'm going to wear. At this point, I want to be invisible, period. So, of course, when we received this letter, it was pretty heavy. I mean, it's a sensitive one, and we are celebrating Women's History Month this year, and we understand that sometimes these are certain things that women are experiencing, and we want to help give voice to some of the things that women in our churches may be going through. And so we do have a special guest with us. I'm going to bring her on at this time. This is Teresa. Let me move you up here beside me. Teresa Best. She, for those who do not know her, she serves as our human resources director at Allegheny East Conference. And we're very happy to have her join us. All of us were part of a workers' meeting where she presented very eloquently on the subject of sexual harassment. And so we thought it was only necessary that she be here to kind of help us work through this dialogue. It's a very sensitive thing, and it's not something that we want to take lightly. So thank you, Teresa, for joining us.
Thank you for inviting me.
Yes. So obviously, when we were hearing something like this, we all felt kind of like unqualified, like, and I know the guys especially felt like, oh, we're not touching this. But
No pun intended.
Right. I was about to say that.
yeah, we're not touching this. But at the same time, as we thought about it, we were like, this is why we're here. We're here to talk about the things that don't get talked about. And one of the things that our listener shared is she asked the question, how do we define sexual harassment? Because some people may listen to what she said and described and say, that's not sexual harassment. That person didn't mean anything by it. They're just being playful. It's not a big deal. So, Teresa, let's start off with that. What is sexual harassment? How do we define it?
Okay. Well, in a nutshell, I rather than kind of go through all the legalese because it is defined statutorily, I'll kind of mix and match some layman's terms with what the statute actually says. But sexual harassment, it includes but isn't limited to unwelcome sexual advances, requests for sexual favors, and other conduct of a sexual nature when the submission to or rejection is made a condition of someone's employment or volunteer status, because we do have volunteers. Submission to or rejection of the conduct is used as a basis of employment decisions or decision concerning their volunteer status. Or the conduct is severe or pervasive enough that it creates an intimidating, hostile, or offensive working environment or unreasonably interferes with the employee or volunteer's work environment. And I'll kind of stop there because this really, what you shared, really deals more with that third prong that I just mentioned. What your letter writer indicated was that she was feeling uncomfortable in the environment, that it had gotten to the place where she wanted to be invisible, and she was stressed about what to wear because of the behavior of individuals in the environment. And so that would be sort of the area that may apply. I would like to go back to something that you said, though, initially. And you said that we all felt unqualified. Well, actually, you're not. And let me ask you a question, and it will kind of prove my point. As you read her letter, did you feel offended yourself? Did you feel concern for her? Did you feel that this was wrong? And I'll just ask if we take turns.
Yeah, let's take turns.
Responding to that.
I'll let the guys go first.
See, I knew that.
Well, I was taken back by it, and more specifically that it was female to female.
Yeah.
Sort of unusual. You don't really hear, much of that, but I thought it was interesting and more unsettling, actually, because it was female to female. And it looked to me like it was like a joke to them, a joke to the perpetrators. So, yeah, my reaction was thought unusual, but it is harassment nevertheless.
Okay.
I must acknowledge another hat that I have worn in life. I spent 3 years as the executive director of the Commission on Human Relations for the city of Philadelphia. And a part of our task was to maintain the laws and to apply the laws that dealt with working conditions. And so many times we had to deal with sexual harassment cases in the workplace. But beyond that, when I listened to this case, my first thought was, is it sexual harassment or is it a harassment of a nature that borders on this person's definition of her own sexuality? It's a little more complex, especially in a situation where she is not employed, but where she is socially involved and engaged. So I began to think of all the different parameters, but then I relaxed and said, Sister Best is here. I don't have to think that hard. So I backed off.
What?
Your turn.
I didn't even want to put it on the show today because I was one of them was like, we can't put this on. Out of all the complaints that we get that people want us to talk about, I think this is difficult to talk about, especially like we said before. It's same sex. I think there's still a lot that's involved, but the honest truth is that when the letter came in, I was super uncomfortable that I didn't even want to say anything about it. It's because it also seems like there's something more going on here as far as this is concerned, but otherwise than that, yes, uncomfortable.
Okay.
Yeah, and as a woman to reading it, I was disturbed. I mean, to answer your question, I was disturbed because one, to the point where she wants to feel invisible. So to me, that
Yeah.
shows the level of impact this is having on her. And knowing that, this may have happened with a friend, but also just people in general at church just pointing this out on this on a repeated basis. It's like you expect church to be your safe place. You expect church to be the place you go and you're accepted and, received well. And she's not feeling that. And I feel like if this is one person's experience, it could be two or three or four other women's experience. But they may not feel comfortable talking about it or speaking about it. So, that's why I felt like, we can kind of, on behalf of her and other women who may be experiencing this, kind of bring it to the forefront.
So I thank you all for responding to my question, and you've all just proven that you are qualified. And the reason I say that is because you all recognize that it was wrong. See, the issue that the federal statute, and yes, it doesn't apply for employment situations and official volunteer situations, and our churches are employment settings for our pastors and locally funded employees and for our official volunteers. However, what we're talking about here is respect. It really boils down to respect. And each of you was able to recognize from what was shared in the letter that this woman was disrespected, that her person was violated. And that's not difficult to recognize. And so, yes, we are qualified, if you would, to speak about it, to address it, because we can address issues of respect. And it's the fact that it is female on female makes no difference. It is statutorily, and even in terms of respect, you are to respect someone of the same gender just as much as you respect someone who is of the opposite sex. And so it's not okay because someone is the same gender as you to touch their person in a way that's not acceptable to them, or to touch their private parts without their permission. And
Yeah,
so this is inappropriate behavior. And I know that may be a matter for another time, but there could also be legal implications. And so, it should be understood that in our churches, we should be able to come and worship and fellowship without being disrespected and violated.
Absolutely. Now, when we think about sexual harassment, usually it's in the context of the work environment. People are a little bit more on their P's and Q's when they're, and of course, church for some is a work environment. And, you mentioned volunteers being included in that. Volunteers still kind of have to follow the same. So, are the rules different? I think we kind of touched on this, but are the rules different in a work environment versus a church environment? I mean,
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask. That what would the actual charge be, Sister Best? I mean, because I guess you could still call it harassment, but what would you actually, if she were to level a case, what would that case look like?
Yeah, so we're sort of wading into the weeds a little bit here, but one thing, I don't, I would need to know her actual status. If she is an official volunteer, then it's the same as if she were an employee. But whether or not she's an employee or a volunteer or a church member, there may be a slight difference in the way we approach it, but we would approach it nonetheless. We would deal with it nonetheless. And the other thing is that even no matter what, there could be there are some legal implications. Let me give you an example to sort of help sort this out. I was involved in a case with a prior employer where it was a supervisor and a subordinate, and they were opposite gendered. But I want you to hear what I'm about to talk about here. They engaged in what the supervisor felt was some consensual affection. Okay. And the employee, the subordinate, later indicated that it wasn't consensual. And that when the supervisor passed by her later in the day, that his hand brushed her behind. And so what that employee, so we dealt with it as an employer. We investigated and made our findings and dealt with everything that happened. However, that subordinate employee chose to swear out a warrant for sexual battery. Now, I want you to hear what I said. The individual indicated that when the supervisor walked by her, that his hand brushed her behind. Now, she swore out a warrant for sexual battery on that. It went to court, and the supervisor was convicted and had to register as a sex offender.
Get out of
when I
town.
say there are some legal implications, it doesn't matter whether, there's the issue of us as an organization dealing with the behavior. But there can be implications beyond us as an employer. And, we want to be very, very mindful that as Christians, that if we simply show Christian respect for one another and conduct ourselves in a way that is God honoring, then we avoid we pretty much will avoid this area for the most part. It's not that some people don't have beliefs and standards that are different from your own, and you need to be notified of such. But you can get in a lot of trouble beyond us as an employer when you put your hands on people, when you touch people in a way that they don't approve of.
Now, I would imagine that a part of that case was the pre-existing affectionate exchanges that had occurred. In other words, the inadvertent or brushing of the woman's posterior by this gentleman's hands was considered in the light of the fact that they had a relationship of some sorts before that. That did factor in, didn't it, Sister Bess?
Well, again, this was a court case, and I wasn't involved in the court case. But what I want everyone to understand is that there are laws of the land. And I am not an attorney, and so I am not qualified to get into.
But you play one on the UpSet podcast.
But what I will say is that by law, in pretty much any state in the United States, if you touch someone's private area without their permission, that's pretty much the definition of sexual battery. And so the context, your intentions, and all that. I'm sure the judge and the jury, they'll listen to it. But the bottom line is you really need to not touch people when they don't want you to touch them.
Right. And that's the key point. And you mentioned the word intention. So I'm sure, people at church, because this is happening at church with different people. She even mentioned this happening during foot washing, someone slapping on her. And I'm sure these individuals, if they, and then she did say, I think she did at least imply that she has expressed that she doesn't like it or she's uncomfortable with it. I'm sure these individuals are like, oh, I didn't mean anything by it. Oh, like, why are you making a big deal out of this? Come on, girl. This is just play or whatever. I think a lot of times with harassment, especially of a sexual nature, people dismiss what's going on because of what they may have intended, not necessarily how it was received by the person impacted. And I think maybe that's something that, is not necessarily, because I know you use the word unwelcome. So whether you intend it to be negative or not, if they receive it as, I don't want this, it's still upon us not to honor that.
Yes. You were paying attention to the training, weren't you, LaTonya? Because it is the perception of the victim that bears the weight versus the intentions of the accused. Yeah. That's what is given precedence, is how that person experienced it. And, we have to acknowledge that there are, we need to be mindful of the culture that we create, and that we need to make sure that we are part of a culture of respect. And so there are things there. We even have cultural differences in terms of what is accepted. I recall in church decades ago, actually, we had someone who began visiting the church who was from a different culture. And in that culture, their personal space was a lot closer than the American standard of personal space. Usually, an American, if you come within like 2.5 feet, this is sort of my intimate zone. And if you're not, my spouse, my family, why are you in this intimate space? And this other culture, their intimate space zone was a lot shorter. So I remembered when this individual sat next to me, and it was the same gendered person, so it was another female. When this person sat next to me, I'm like, why is this woman creeping up on me? I don't get this. And so again, because I have a different comfort zone standard that was culturally conditioned, and hers was different than mine. And so we talked about it, and I realized it was simply a cultural difference. She wasn't creeping up on me. That was her comfort zone in terms of sitting next to someone at church and engaging. We ended up being good friends. So what we need to realize is that it's important that we look for cues, look for when individuals tell us, hey, I don't want to be hugged. There are people who don't like to be touched. There are individuals that, they're comfortable with certain people, touching them or coming in their space, and not whatever it is not for you to criticize or condemn or try to change them. You need to respect it.
That's the key, respect.
The church is a zone, an arena where issues of human sexuality and emotional interplay are heightened. I mean, just even some of the language of church where we do laying on of hands, that there's no workplace where anybody ever does laying on of hands, greet each other with a holy kiss. I mean, that is the language of our community. And then we talk about things that involve intimacy, not necessarily sexual intimacy, but intimacy. Are church zones areas where we are prone to have heightened contact that might be confused, from your experience?
Yes. And the thing is,
Pat. Okay, go ahead.
But the thing is, it keeps coming back to the issue of respect. You have to respect what an individual is comfortable with. I'll give you another church example. There was a female member. My husband is a pastor, and there was a female member of our church who was going through a very difficult time in her family. And it got to and because of behaviors that she was experiencing from her a former spouse, she became very uncomfortable with close contact with males. And so she made it known, I will hug female members, but I don't want to hug males. Just understand where I am right now. And there were some male members who wanted to chastise her about that and tell her that that was not appropriate. Well, their attitude was not appropriate. She has a right to say, I want to limit contact and share that her wishes, and they must be respected. And that's why I mentioned that I agreed with you that there can be confusion. And that's why I mentioned that you have to look for cues that people give you and respect their wishes when they express them. Because we have to recognize that person has a right to the body that God gave them, the temple that God gave them, and to keep it according to their conscience and their comfort level. And it is not appropriate for us in the name of the Lord to violate them.
That's right. That's right. So, women, we come in all shapes and sizes. I mean, men as well, but and there are, for some women,
I think she was just talking about me. I feel
I
harassed.
think so.
Go ahead.
that was all inclusive. you know, there are certain attributes of people that may stand out more than others. I mean, for this viewer, it was her behind. For some women, it's their breast or extra wide hips or something. And sometimes I feel like people assume that since it's out there, it's almost like
Go ahead and touch it.
yeah. No, I'm saying it's almost like
No, I don't even mean be like that, but
no, but
I'm
some
sorry.
people, I'm no, you're laughing, but I do think some people kind of have that. I've seen women walk up to other women and like squeeze their breast, and it's not solicited.
Really?
You know what I'm saying?
Okay, so this is
But it's
new
like,
for me.
girl, look,
This,
what is all this? And people do, and that's what I'm saying. Like some people take it upon themselves that, hey, it's in my face. So I'm not understanding that
wow.
women don't like that. I mean, I don't like it, but I'm just saying, but they're like, hey, it's there. I've heard them say that. Hey, I mean, come on. I'm a woman.
I
I
didn't know women did that to women.
Listen, I'm going to be honest.
Yeah.
When go back to the very beginning when Teresa asked us, how did you feel when you read this? When I looked at it, I was like, yo, they do that? Because I'm not even going to rub a man's belly. I'm not going to do anything. No. Here's what I'm saying. I do understand that it happens, and I'll tell you why. Because I noticed that women look at women.
Oh yeah,
But
yeah.
that's what I noticed, and I have asked women friends. I've asked my wife even. Said, "Why do you look at women?" I was like, "Because I like their shoes. I like what they're wearing. I like what they're this, that, and the other." If we looked at women that way, it'll come across as, flirty or something of that nature. So even to hear it, it sounds foreign to me that a woman is gonna be in communion and washing feet in communion, and you touch a woman touch a woman, much less why we split. I think this is the reason why we split it up, put women in one place and men in another place and couples in another place, because of you don't want to
and washing.
listen. I'm uncomfortable even talking about this right now, so I'll see y'all later.
Let me jump into that
Yeah.
and respond to what Latasha was sharing and what you were responding. Let's not normalize bad behavior.
Mhm.
This is just wrong.
Yes.
I mean, there's, let's not try to make that you see more than one person do it. It's just wrong. It's not normal. It's not right. It's not good. You don't walk up to someone because their breasts are protruding and put your hands on them. I don't care who you are, or they're behind, or anything like that. The person who engages in that kind of behavior, the issue is with them. It is not with the person whose body is shapely and all of that. And no matter what they have on, no matter how they're shaped and so forth and so on, that is not the issue. For someone to whatever, I can't imagine what a person would say to themselves that they would allow them to go up to another human being and do that. I have no response for that. None.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
to say it's not good, it's not right, it's not normal.
Question though, is it when I and in the beginning you gave a definition of sexual harassment, and I'm imagining that the word sexual speaks of those elements in behavior that lead to either titillation or, no pun intended by the use of that word, or um
I love you, Nick.
I mean, I'm sincere, titillation or arousal. In other words, some precursor to the possibility of sexual engagement. So can it be called sexual harassment if there is nothing, if it is not intended to engage? For example, if say we're in a gym and Pat's working out and his shoulders are becoming broader, and I put my hand on his shoulders and said, "Man, you're really starting to, you're starting to get some guns up there."
You want to see it? I mean, I'm
You
working
see?
out.
I mean, and that happens. I'm not. This isn't sexual, but it is physical.
Yeah.
And it may have something to do with his sense of sexual identity because his maleness may be involved. So when a woman does that to another woman and slaps another woman on the rear end, it is absolutely inappropriate. It is a boundaries issue. But is it sexual? Can it be defined as such?
Yes, it can be defined as sexual harassment because harassment, unwelcome behavior based on someone's gender also meets the definition of sexual harassment. So For example, if the perpetrators in this case only did that to females or to her and not to a male, that would still meet the definition
So if
because
she did
it's
it to a male, she'd
gender-based
be okay.
behavior. Hmm?
If she did it to a male, she would be in better
No, it just
standing.
wouldn't meet the definition of sexual harassment necessarily for that part of the definition. But
Wow.
because let me clean it up. But
Okay.
because private areas are involved, then it would be.
So your rear end is
You're
private,
in the
isn't it?
private area.
So what I'm saying is that something can be sexual harassment because it's gender-based, or because it's of a sexual nature, as you were indicating. You can have either prong fit the definition of sexual harassment.
I have a question.
Go ahead, Chuck.
If this action were to take place in a private setting versus a public setting, would it A, make any difference to the claim, and B, can someone be falsely accused?
No, it wouldn't make difference as to the claim. And yes, someone can be falsely accused. That's why we investigate a matter. And instead of saying falsely accused, let's just say that people have different standards
or perceptions.
and the statute calls us to apply the reasonable person standard. There is a possibility that a person can walk by you and you say, wow, that's a really nice outfit, and that person is offended and thinks that you have engaged in sexual harassment. Well, we would apply the reasonable person standard there. If that's all you said and you weren't leering at the person, looking them up and down, making them feel like they had to go home and take a shower, it's unlikely that it would be deemed inappropriate behavior. But some people have different standards, and we have to take all of that into consideration as we're reviewing a matter. However, we do apply the reasonable person standard. Would a reasonable person find this behavior offensive? And so, sometimes, yes, when you said, I believe it was false accusation, that there's an implication there that the person kind of completely made it up. Sometimes it's not that people are making it up. It's just that they are particularly sensitive, or they have a very high standard that, may exceed what most people would consider reasonable.
Well, what if that accusation is made in a private setting with just those individuals, and they make they accuse the other party? What happens after that?
Well, I will tell you what we actually ask when someone has behaved inappropriately toward you, because it can be, there's a whole range of inappropriate behaviors. It can be exposing to someone to visual things that make them feel uncomfortable. It could be sounds, gestures, touching, words. But what we first ask everyone to do is if you're comfortable, to let the person know that you find their behavior offensive. And if the behavior stops there, then the matter is essentially resolved. It doesn't preclude you from letting us know, so that we can, keep a record and make sure we monitor that person's behavior and make sure they're clear that their behavior may have crossed a line. But that is the first preference, is that you say to the person, this makes me feel uncomfortable. Now, let's be honest, though, there are certain situations where you may not be comfortable telling the offender that their behavior is making you feel uncomfortable. I share in the training a situation that I experienced on my very first full-time job. I was essentially being harassed by a male coworker, and I found myself alone with him in an elevator. And he decided to take that opportunity to corner me because I was standing in front of the buttons. He cornered me, hovered over me, and started laughing in a very menacing way. And I just couldn't wait to get off that elevator. But did I feel comfortable in that moment to look up to that 6'7" man, say, excuse me, your behavior is making me feel uncomfortable. I wish you would stop. Absolutely not. When I got off the elevator, I made the report to my supervisor. who went to his supervisor, who dealt with him, and the behavior stopped.
Wow.
Okay. Well,
I mean, I'm sorry you went through that. That sounds. I mean, as a man, we don't think of that happening. First of all, ain't too many 6'7" women who will be towering over me. But I mean, but the idea. I mean, you don't. You have to put on somebody else's shoes. Man, that's just. That's horrible.
But
That's
that is
horrible.
true though, Tally, that men experience it as well. I mean, men are most likely not to say anything about it because it's almost like a manhood thing. Yeah, of course she wants me. Like they don't want to seem like, what, you didn't want the woman to touch you, you don't want her to say these things to you. So, but I think we think sexual harassment, we think a man doing something to a woman, but now we're learning it can be women to women. It happens from women to men. And
male to male.
Male
Let's
to
go.
male to male, and I was going to even say that, with the sports thing, that's like a thing in the sports. Men slap each other as they're going out into the field. I've seen that on the basketball court.
Look, I played football and
that's the norm there, right? Like no one thinks anything of that, right? But what if somebody doesn't like it?
Then it has to be respected. It has to be respected.
In the context of the writer and her testimony or her story, let me back up. Could she have reported this to the church administration?
Yes. Yeah.
And what would have been
to report it to the pastor? Because it sounds like she tried to address it with the individuals and they didn't take her seriously. So then she should report it to the pastor. Yes. Or
and in that case, I have a two-part question. In that case, what would be expected of the church as an institution in responding to her complaint? A. B, if this only took place in a private setting, in a home, either the perpetrator's home or the victim's home, would the accusation also be applicable to reporting it as though it took place in a public place?
Okay. So I need to answer your question separately. So your first question was, what is the response of the organization? The responsibility of the organization is to stop the behavior and prevent its reoccurrence, period. Okay. To stop the behavior and prevent its reoccurrence.
I'm sorry.
Okay, let me stop you there. How does that happen? What does that mean?
So again, these individuals would be, again, I'm talking about a church setting. So
that's what I was going to say.
I'm dealing with this as if these are just members and no one's an official volunteer or an employee. So you would pull the individuals aside. So you would ask the complainant to share who was engaging in this behavior and pull those individuals aside and make sure they understand that it's not appropriate. It has to stop. And then, and also what some potential consequences. And so it may be that the church, if the individuals cannot control their behavior, that they may have to be prohibited from attending. You can't allow, remember, technically this is technically, because it's unwelcome to her, potentially illegal behavior. Okay. And so and again, I don't want to get into all that, but we really don't want to allow the church to be a hunting ground for people to engage in inappropriate behaviors. Over the years as a church member, even especially before I was married, female church members and I would talk about during the meet and greet time, how churches will have that, well, let's all greet each other and give each other a holy hug and all that. And there were individuals that we would try to escape, that we would try to make sure didn't get to us because their quote unquote hugs were not holy. Okay. And so, people should not be enduring this in church. So we can do training for the church. So the body at large, we also need to pull those individuals aside to let them know that this behavior is inappropriate and must stop. And if it does not stop, then we may have to take the step to say, you can't attend here. If you can't show the proper respect, if you're going to engage in assaulting members, so there are a myriad of options that are available, but the responsibility is to stop the behavior and to prevent its reoccurrence.
Mhm.
That is so skeevy. I mean, to take it, try. I mean, and I remember hearing that about a couple of brethren in the church. I mean, to be a deacon of the church and to take advantage of an opportunity like that to try to get your jollies is just skeevy. But
Yeah.
let me go to another topic, Sister Bess, and that is, if I had a nickel for every time someone came up to me and said, Pastor, you need to talk to some of these sisters in the choir, because you know, in the Black church, there is an element of dress and display. I mean, and I'm when I'm at church, when I was at worship, and I know this may sound like I'm being holier than thou, I'm in another zone. I'm not thinking too much about certain things. But if I had a nickel for every time somebody came and said, you know, some of the sisters up there, and somebody need to tell them how to dress and all, and I would tell them again and again and again and again. The day has not come, nor will it come, when I would go to any woman in this church and tell them that what they're wearing is too short, too tight, too revealing, or whatever. That is not my job. You know, when it comes to that, I'm Stevie Wonder, and that the head deaconess one of the deaconesses needs to go talk. If you women are having problems with what women are saying, y'all need to handle that. I'm not dealing it. What should a pastor? What role should he have, or should he avoid taking on when it comes to addressing that kind of matter in a church setting?
Well, you opened a whole separate can of worms.
Yeah, but
That's a whole different topic, as you well know. You know, so I appreciate that that you did raise it. Like I said, it is a separate topic, but what I would do is you would need to be sensitive to the fact, and you kind of touched on it, that
I didn't touch on it.
No,
yeah,
make sure.
pardon, no pun intended. That it is a delicate matter when you're dealing with the opposite sex.
Yeah.
And I recall way back soon after I was baptized, actually, into the church, that someone who was like an uncle figure to a teenager, when she wore a micro mini dress and it bent over, just said, just went over and said something to her, just in a very kind of church family kind of way. The whole family was in an uproar. And so you do want to be sensitive to that. And I appreciate your perspective that you will turn it over to the ladies of the church to address in a manner, to address it in a way that will remove that potential issue. And so certainly when you're dealing with delicate matters of this nature, you want to try to remove as much of the potential for unintended consequences as possible. So pray about it. Obviously, pray about it first, but I have no qualms with it being turned over to the ladies of the church. And there's biblical precedent for that, about the women of the church helping the other women of the church. There's a biblical precedent for that. And the Lord is the one that is all wise. And I think we need to follow his counsel there.
yeah, but that does tie into
Yeah.
some of the reasons why women who experience this don't necessarily share it, because maybe they've shared it with a sister and they said, well, you do dress kind of, they almost make the woman feel guilty, or that they brought it upon themselves based on how they were dressed.
That's not appropriate.
Exactly.
No, that's not appropriate. We are accountable before God and man for the behavior, for our biblical conversation, if you would, which, as you know, is the totality of our conduct. And simply because you find what someone is wearing sexually suggestive or revealing, that doesn't give you license to sin in any way. Not at all. And so what it is, what it what is bothersome to me is hearing the excuse. You kind of hear it sometimes when it in rape cases. Well, you know, she was carrying herself a certain way.
Right.
She was drunk. That gives you no right to violate her person in any way. And when it comes to court, that's the way that's the way it should be. That should be the verdict, that you're guilty. But as you also know, in court there's a lot of victim shaming. And as a church, we have no business
Right.
engaging in that to excuse our own sinful and inappropriate behavior.
And I do want to put it out there for women who may have followed all of the steps that you shared. They've voiced this to someone, they, spoken to the pastor per se, and maybe they feel like the situation wasn't handled the way you recommended with training or speaking to the offender. Is there what is the next step for them if they've spoken to the local pastor or local leadership and they still don't feel like the situation has been resolved? Is that when they would engage the conference, or what would be the next step?
Yes, well, even the pastor is the conference. So, but yes, they can reach out to human resources or one of the officers anytime anyone has a complaint of this nature. Don't ever feel that you have nowhere to go. So if you have not received a satisfactory response, i.e., the behavior has not stopped, then please reach out to my office, to one of the conference officers, and we will make sure that it is appropriately addressed, i.e., we will see that the behavior stops and we prevent its reoccurrence.
Has it ever been one of those moments where someone's come to you and you said, "Did you tell your pastor?" And they said, "It is the pastor"?
Well, let's go on to the next question. So what oh, oh no, you can go ahead.
Well, to just kind of answer your question in a respectful manner, any class of employee can be guilty of misconduct, and sexual misconduct, sexual harassment is not appropriate. And yes, it is the case that different classes of employees have engaged in that behavior. I'm not talking about this conference in particular. I'm talking about, anywhere, any church setting. Unfortunately, there are a lot of articles written about clergy abuse, misusing the power of the position, because there is inherent power with the position of pastor. And there is no such thing as consensual in that case, just like it with a therapist. And so we need to be mindful, and that's why we as a conference train our pastors and make sure they understand the boundaries and the professional standards and ethics that they must abide by to properly be under shepherds of the flock that Jesus has assigned to them through the conference. And so, yes, it is the case that, anyone can be guilty of engaging in that behavior. And when that behavior comes to me and it is a pastor, we engage in the same process as we would if any other class of employee was the accused.
That was very adroitly answered, Mrs. Best. I mean, you may not be a lawyer, but you get real close to being one and answering that one.
I'm looking back at the letter. I know, we're landing this plane, but I'm looking back at the letter, and it seems as though this letter is not talking about one person at the church that this has happened. That I'm seeing even in the opening of the letter that I've had married women pinch me, and that's more than one. And then focusing on another situation. Here's what I want to be careful of. Because I hear you 100% continuing to say it's wrong. It's wrong. The action is wrong. Even when Latasha was was talking to us about what women do with each other. It was uncomfortable, because I'm sure it happens. I've never seen it before. What I'm saying is that when something happens, and then you made I don't mean to go back over this, but you even were talking about what happened in the elevator and when to be able to discuss this. I think when something happens, and I'm trying to say this talking to her directly, or those who this have happened to directly, men or females, is that you have to take the next opportune time to show your distaste in it. The next opportune time, if not right then and there, because the interpretation that the person who is wrong will have is that she or he, they don't care, they're all right with it, or they feel like it's okay. I'm saying that because if someone says something to you in church, and I'm going to use a church situation, if someone says, I like the way you look, or even let's go to further, or touch you, immediately you ought to let them know that this is not something that you want done. I think that is what those who are listening need to hear. How immediate is another question. But if this is something that's going on over and over and over, and you're not saying anything about it, and you're smiling with them, or you're laughing and giggling with him, it still tells a story, even though initially it's wrong. Am I on a track here?
Yeah, and I wanted to say too, even when I was sharing that some women do that. I think Pat's cat got him. Even when people do that, people try to normalize their inappropriate behavior for you. And that's kind of what I was pointing out. Like, oh, I do this all the time. Like, I do this with her. I do it. Well, why are you upset? And that's what I wanted people to understand. Like, just because someone is trying to make it seem common, or I do this with her, I do this with her, why are you upset? Doesn't mean that you have to accept the behavior as appropriate for you. You set your own standards and your own boundaries, and you verbalize that. And that
got Pat barking over there about that one.
Well, I would say too that, and also be careful, because that's why I gave my elevator example. It is not uncommon for you to never feel comfortable addressing the person who perpetrated the behavior, and you should always have some place to go. And it then is the responsibility of that person that you went to as a usually it's going to be a representative of the organization, to make sure that the behavior is addressed. So if you never feel comfortable, like I never said anything to that individual who hovered over me in the elevator about that incident or all the other things that he had been doing. It was known, people heard and saw what he was doing, but no one intervened. But what I did was I went to my supervisor, and my supervisor made sure that it was dealt with, and my work environment was different from then on. And I wasn't the only one he was behaving that way toward. And so know that if you can, even if you don't feel comfortable addressing the person or persons directly, please let someone in a position of authority know, because there could be other people who are suffering this behavior, and we want to stop this perpetrator. And the other thing that when I train pastors, especially as I continue to do the training, because this training is not a one and done, it's done on a regular basis every year or two, that you want to create a culture and an environment of respect. And so you may need to say from the pulpit, when post-COVID, when we go back to in person and there's the meet and greet and all of that, to just make a comment about, remember to be respectful, and so forth. So you want to make sure that you create a culture.
That's where holy hugs came from.
Is respectful.
That's where holy hugs, holy kisses.
That, and you may have to invite me in to do some training. That's fine. We want to make sure that the culture that we are a part of, that we are part of creating, does not say that it's okay. Go ahead, grab whoever you want to grab, do whatever, as long as they don't say anything, it's okay. That's not true. That does not reflect the values of Allegheny East Conference or the Seventh-day Adventist Church.
There's something else that needs to be taken into consideration here, and that is about reception and processing. And this is when it becomes a little complex. People may actually invite behavior that later on, as they process it, they begin to feel uncomfortable about. For example, somebody may want to feel attractive, and they may appeal to the interest of individuals so that they can feel attractive. And then when the response comes, they may have mixed emotions about how they feel about the response that they have received. Then after a week of processing it, they may come back and realize, hey, wait a minute, I don't think that that was appropriate, even if they may have had something to do with inviting it. And I know that sounds complex. And I'm trying to look at Mrs. Best's face to see what she thinks about it.
Yeah,
I'm not excusing the behavior of the person who acts upon it, but I'm simply saying a person can be a bit confused about what stimuli they're sending out and how they're processing it once they receive a response to it.
Yeah,
Pat told me to ask that question.
I sure
I
did.
hear you. I hear you. Let me parse it out a little bit for you. You said, people want to feel attractive and so forth. We should all have personal standards that we receive from Jesus Christ. Amen. And then, of course, the conference, has its standards for employees and volunteers. But believe me, God's standards are even higher. Okay, because our standards match and reflect the Lord's standards of our employees. But so if someone is even flirting with you, okay,
yeah,
that does not give you license to behave in an ungodly way. So if they're flirting with you, you don't grab the person's breast. Okay, that's just no, you don't do that. Now, one of the things that a situation that often leads to most sexual harassment complaints, and I say that I've done several investigations, so take my word for it on this, is that a relationship starts out consensual, and then for one person, it's not anymore. They don't want it anymore. And you have to, when that person says stop or no, you have to respect it. That's the bottom line. And you should always conduct yourself in a way that you do not cross certain boundaries, even in situations where there is flirtation. Does that help address what, because I don't want it to ever be believed that it's okay without someone's permission for you to touch their private area or their person, really. But also in those situations where there is mutual flirtation, mutual attraction, mutual interest, that you look for those cues, that you understand where that person's boundaries are. And if that person has had a change of heart, they have a change of heart, you have to respect it right then.
Mm-hmm. There we go with that respect thing. That's what it seems to all boil down to.
Let me ask this one last question, at least for me. Is flirtation without touching, is flirtation without any kind of physical contact considered harassment?
It can be. Because remember, the behavior has to be unwelcome. And it can be, and then the other standard that we look at is whether or not it's severe or pervasive. And so if someone begins to flirt, and again, this is the way most sexual harassment complaints arise. Someone starts to flirt, and whether or not the person it's welcome at first, I'm not even going to deal with. But what you have to realize is that if at any point it becomes unwelcome to the person, let's say for a month it was welcome, you went out on dates even, but the person just decided, no, I don't want this. Then at that point, as soon as that person determines that they don't want it, they let you know, no, stop asking me out, stop flirting with me, or, well, no, you've gone too far. That's not how I roll. Then you need to check yourself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And as a pastor, there's no defense. I mean, I mean, we're always in a position of ultimate responsibility.
That's right. That's right.
So when they tell you that, I'm speaking to the younger pastors now.
Hey,
They come in and say, Pastor, we know you're human just like the rest of us, and we understand you're just another person, you're just another man, and we realize that you go through all the same things, and we want you to know that we don't believe it. Don't believe it, because
Nick, we're in a different world now. That's why I think it's important for not even every 2 years, but every year, for not just pastors, but the church to go through something like this, because things change. Even the culture changes. The things that the things that men wear and women wear are totally different than what it was before. I was taught to wear classic suits
and holy shoes.
You know, here we go. Here we go. Teresa, that's a private joke, but you know, actually it's private for you. But yeah, I do wear holy shoes. And the thing is that it changes. You know, you could see now that you have men who wear tight clothing now. I mean, it's what, straight leg or whatever the case may be, or whatever name comes across for it.
The skinny jeans look, yeah,
but to church. So things change. So there are, you know, I don't want to put blame on anyone, but I also feel that we have to check ourselves. We have to check ourselves also. There's a responsibility both ways. So if someone comes up to me and says, hey, button your shirt or whichever, sometimes you got to look at it as, are they helping? Or are they Nick, come on, just a little bit higher, Nick, just a little bit higher.
Yeah, didn't know it disturbed you, Pat.
I just feel like it's a constant thing that we have to go through, a constant learning, because things change, people change. Why I say that, Mr. Reese, is because I'm sure there was somewhere back in the day, there must have been some kind of training why we started calling it holy hugs and holy kisses.
What's in the Bible?
Well, I don't know how much you read it, Nick, but I'm just saying it gets to a point where I do get up on the rostrum or on the pulpit and say, okay, this is our welcome time, holy hugs, holy kisses, because we want them to know that there is a Sabbath hug. You know, there's such thing as a Sabbath hug. Okay, you don't know that there's
it's not the same.
May I interject here a little bit when you're talking about the clothing? Let's be honest. When someone engages in inappropriate behavior, sexual harassment, and so forth, the issue is with the perpetrator, not the person against whom their behavior is levied. I could wear a burlap sack that went straight down to the ground and could still be have someone behave inappropriately toward me and grab, you know, my person. I'll share an incident. I was at one point I was a full-time Bible worker, and I was out in the field, and you think, oh, you know, I'm doing holy work, you know, and of course, you know, when you're out doing Bible work in the field, you know, you kind of look like I dressed like something off a Little House on the Prairie. And so, but I recall, and not to denigrate that style, you know, I embraced it, but I recalled, I was, you know, standing in an area where we were doing our work, going door to door work, and looking for my next contact. And this man in the community was standing there just looking at me and staring at me, and it gave me the creeps. And so I think I addressed him, and he said, you know, I'm just enjoying the view. Now, mind you, there was nothing exposed, tight, okay? It has nothing. So just don't even bring into the conversation the way the person puts themselves together. You can be a woman, can be in an old-fashioned nun's habit. Okay, it doesn't matter.
I want to say something, because
the issue is with the perpetrator, that whatever they're telling themselves that allows them to engage in inappropriate conduct toward another.
That's true. That needs to sit.
But the word, I'm sorry, Latasha, the word responsibility is not necessarily the address. There's a responsibility even after the situation occurs. The first time the situation occurs, I think there's a responsibility there also. I'm not talking about the responsibility of, oh, you shouldn't be wearing that, or else I wouldn't do this. That's really not what I'm talking about. I think that when I think about the letter, there's a couple of things that need to be addressed about the letter, the lady who wrote the letter. What I'm saying is that there's some, and you said it also, there's something to do after this occurred. I'm not making it right if she doesn't do anything about it 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 times. Obviously, something is going around why so many women, more than one, if you even say 2, that's enough to be pinching you or whatever. But I believe that the complaint should happen almost immediately. I ended the last conversation by saying, I don't know what immediately means. I can't put the person in that place of knowing. But also when we think about church, you don't want to ostracize anyone at church. You don't want to put anybody on Front Street at church. And so one of the things that I would say is, if it's so uncomfortable that you even feel that you need to be invisible, I mean, that's deep to say that you don't even want to go to the church anymore because you don't want to feel invisible. Something has to be done immediately about that.
But remember, she did address these individuals.
That's the tough part, and that's
what she put in the letter that she said, and that's why her friendship is on life support.
Well, my closing statements. I mean, Pat has said about where we get the holy kiss, holy hug thing from. Yeah, Romans 16:16. It says, "Greet each other, with a holy kiss." 2 Corinthians 13 speaks of greet one another with a holy kiss. 1 Thessalonians 5:26, greet all of God's people with a holy kiss. And so the language is in scripture and we use it, but unfortunately, a lot of folks have not figured out the difference between the holy and the profane. And so
we need to help them.
We need to help them. I mean, my thing would be to stop
that. Then they have to fellowship elsewhere.
I think we need to stop that whole welcoming thing where you turn around and tell everybody to hug somebody.
I was thinking about that,
especially
I feel like
COVID,
Yeah, that does help.
Well, we need to start first with, tell your neighbor, I don't feel like talking in church. Oh, tell your neighbor. And tell
turn around, touch your neighbor and tell them, you might be homely, but the Lord loves you. Look,
touch 5 people.
That's a good way to get the 2-piece, So,
all right, guys, but no, this has really been, I think, a healthy discussion. I do want to thank our listener for sending us this letter and for kind of sounding an alarm.
Courageous.
Yes, very courageous for you to share that. And I hope you know that by sharing it, you're helping others who may be experiencing something similar and bringing it to light. And, Teresa, we thank you for pointing out some of the steps that they can take. If you have reached out to someone and you feel like, and this is within the church setting, and you feel like they have not taken your complaint seriously, you can reach out to the headquarters. And Teresa, I was going to ask you, would that be your HR? Okay,
yes.
So I can put that up there safely. If you would like to reach out to our HR department, if you feel like you have taken all of the previous steps, hr@aecsda.com. We're not just here to talk about things. We definitely want to be able to advocate for those who we never want anyone to feel like they want to stay at home or don't want to go to church because it's going to be an uncomfortable environment for them. And so we're empowering you here now to speak up for yourself. As you pointed out, Teresa, if this is happening to you, it could happen to someone else, who may not be as strong as you. And so, you're actually helping others when you speak out against this type of behavior. So thank you once again, Teresa, for what you shared and the steps and helping us recognize what is harassment and our responsibility to respect people at all times. It's not about your intention. It's about how the person receives it. Thank you so much. All right. That was of course we're recording this. And so we do like to see what you all have to say. We'll be reading the comments in the chat for the dialogue and let us know. As we said before, if there are other topics, maybe of a sensitive nature that you feel that you want us to discuss, on the UpSet. Email us at upset@aecsda.com. We're ready to tackle your topics as well. upset@aecsda.com. All right, guys. Thank you for the conversation.
Yep.
We made it through. We made it through.
Yeah.
And we'll be back next Sunday. Hopefully all the crew will be here. We'll continue doing what we do. But thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time.
So.
Bye-bye.